Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Pop the Culture, where I take something of popular, or at least YA literature, and attempt to tie it to something that's considered a bit more classic, potentially even a bit more highbrow literature. Don't ask me why I've just degenerated into that accent, just roll with it. So in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han, and I shall be tying it to Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. My idea for this episode actually came when I went to go see Jenny Han speak. One of my local Barnes & Nobles here in my hometown was actually the very first stop on her book tour for To All the Boys I've Loved Before, because she's from the town I live in now. That sounds like a YA book title. The Town I Live in Now. From the Town I Live in Now. Challenge, somebody write me a book with that title, or find me a title that's like that. We were the first up on her book tour, and so she did a little talk before she did some signing and stuff. And when she talked about To All the Boys I've Loved Before, she mentioned how she was very highly inspired by Little Women, especially in the relationship between the sisters in this story in relation to the March sisters that Miss Alcott wrote. And I'm sure anybody who's actually read To All the Boys I've Loved Before and has either read Little Women or at least seen the film can definitely see the similarities between the sisters. But I'm not actually going to talk about the sisters today. I know, that kind of sounds like heresy since I've just said, oh my god, perfect discussion point. What I'm going to talk about is actually something else that I noticed within the stories, and that is the trope of the boy next door. Because in both these cases we have a little crush romance between our female protagonist and the boy next door. In the case of Jenny Han, it's Lara Jean Song and the boy next door Josh. And in the case of Louisa May Alcott, it is Jo March and the boy next door Theodore Lawrence, who we will all call Teddy or Laurie. Of course, this is the point where I must give an obligatory spoiler warning. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure just how many spoilers I'm going to be getting into in the case of both these books, but I would rather be safe than sorry, and so if you have not read either of these books, or in the case of Little Women, seen the film that starred Winona Ryder and Christian Bale, great film by the way, see it if you haven't, then I must please ask you to step away, because there is a potential that you will be spoiled when it comes to character relationships within both these novels, and I would hate to be responsible for spoiling you. However, if you have read either of these books, seen the film, what have you, or, you know, just don't generally care about potentially being spoiled, let's carry on. In the case of the idea of the boy next door, I'm going to take it from the perspective of actually the more common trope, which is that of the girl next door. In this case, I'm just flipping it on its head and making it a boy. The idea of girl or guy next door is someone with whom our main protagonist would have grown up with, would have known. So this is someone of the opposite sex with whom our protagonist will not feel intimidated. In the case of women, it's meant to embody some form of average or wholesome femininity. In the case of the guys, I'm just gonna say they're usually very likable, they're very sweet, they're not bad boys, you know, they're borderline brother. They're in the case where they are almost like family, but not quite when it's the boy next door. Probably they come over to the house a lot, and they know the parents really well, so they're almost like family. Now, there are times when this trope is subverted or not done in the same way. These books kind of almost subvert it. In the case of both these books, we have an almost romance between our female protagonist and the boy next door. What's different between the two is whom is having the romance, and what does that then say about the book and the characters involved. In the case of Little Women, between Teddy and our female protagonist Josephine, or Jo March, there is an immediate kinship when they meet. Over the course of the story, we see that relationship deepen. They are next door neighbours, wildly different circumstances. Jo's family is not as wealthy as Laurie's, and Laurie is actually in fact an orphan. He lives with his grandfather. Laurie begins to fall in love with Jo. He falls in love with this wild spirit that she has, and actually between the two of them, they are sort of kindred spirits. Jo, however, does not reciprocate his feelings, and so when Laurie actually proposes to her, she turns him down, and he leaves, obviously very upset. Laurie ends up later marrying Amy, the youngest of the March sisters, and if you want my personal opinion, I always hated that relationship because Amy drove me up the wall crazy, and I did not like her. What's actually interesting about this relationship is that Little Women was initially published in 2 volumes. The first volume closed off pretty much dead center of the story, and so there were fans of the first half, and they were all excited. They loved the Jo and Laurie relationship. Then comes the second half of the book. and Jo ends up marrying someone else. She actually becomes the wife of a German professor whom she meets when she's in New York, and with whom she falls in love, and whom shares a lot of her tastes for literature and other things. Fans were outraged. I know that a whole bunch of them would like petition Miss Alcott saying, "Are you kidding?" And it's really interesting, like, these were the first crazy fangirls. Fangirls. Right here. But you see that the boy next door relationship doesn't work out, and one of the things Jo pretty much does tell Laurie is that you're like my brother, I love you like your family, so you're kind of off limits. It's a little different in To All the Boys I've Loved Before. In this case, it is Lara Jean who had a crush on Josh, who's the boy next door, who's a little older than she is, and whom is actually dating her older sister. Oops. And Lara Jean realizes that she still kind of has feelings for Josh, but what she does is she never tells him. She writes down these love letters where she says she basically exercises all the romantic feelings from her body. Well, unfortunately, those letters get mailed out by we don't know whom. Seriously though, once I knew this was Little Women, I knew exactly whom it was who'd mailed the letters out, but I won't spoil that for you. Josh and Lara Jean's relationship seems to fracture when he finds out about her feelings, and then he sort of starts to, it looks like, turn around and say, no, but I actually might feel the same way. However, he's just been broken up with by her older sister, and so let's be honest, it's a rebound. It's not real relationship kind of feelings, it's a rebound. For her part, Lara Jean is actually starting to develop a relationship with one of the only other boys who got a letter, whom was the first boy that she kissed, and we see in that relationship that these two have sort of much more in common than it is initially set out to imply. In Louisa May Alcott's tale, Jo's refusal of Laurie is actually really powerful. It is almost as powerful as when Lizzie refuses Mr. Collins and then Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. This book is taking place during and in the aftermath of the Civil War. Women had no real place in society. They had almost no rights of their own, and so the fact that Jo refuses the hand of Laurie, this boy who she's known for some time, who she loves dearly, not romantically, but loves dearly, and whom is going to inherit his grandfather's fortune and therefore is going to be extremely wealthy. I mean, turning him down is crazy. And obviously Laurie doesn't take it too well, but they do make up and they forgive each other, and that's a really good thing to see in this. But, as I said, it's an incredible moment for Jo, because Jo, this whole time, is being shown as a very forward thinker. She's pretty much early feminism right here, and she says, there's so much more I want to do in life. She says, no, Laurie, I love you, but not like that, and I don't want to marry unless it is like that. And she says, we'd be miserable together. She goes, you know, we'd be at each other's throats. We're actually two alike. She goes, and I love you like family. What Jo then develops with Professor Bear later in the novel is a meeting of the minds. We see two people who are intellectually and emotionally on very similar levels, but are not as tempestuous with each other. While Laurie and Jo are both fiery spirits, the difference between them is of the Socrates saying, know thyself. Jo knew whom exactly she was and what she wanted to be. She knows that she's fiery and tempestuous, and she also knows that she wants to be a writer. That's what she wants to do, and nothing's going to ever come close to that for her. Unfortunately for Jo, she doesn't have the circumstances to be able to make that dream come true as easily as she would wish. In fact, she sees it as it's probably never going to come true, which is very difficult for her. Laurie, on the other hand, is a fiery and tempestuous spirit. He doesn't really know what he wants to be, or what he wants to do. He tries at business, and he tries at music, and he has all the means to be able to do this because he has his grandfather's money. And yet he still doesn't know whom he is and what he wants. It takes almost the entire book for him to man up and do something. Jo already knew whom she was, and the difference between the two of them is that very thing. So why doesn't it work out in To All the Boys I've Loved Before? Well, between Lara Jean and Josh, we actually have a fairly similar situation. It would seem on the outset actually the exact opposite, that Lara Jean isn't entirely sure of whom she is and whom she wants to be, and on the same token that Josh knows whom he is and knows what he wants. But in the wake of his breakup, we realise that Josh is not as self-assured as he seemed to be, and that actually Lara Jean is fairly sure of whom and what she is. Anyone who could write the letters that Lara Jean does in the story clearly has a sense of self, knows whom she is and kind of knows what she wants. Josh, on the other hand, is going between her older sister and her and flip-flopping, unsure of what to do. Now sure, human emotions are complex and they're messy, so it kind of makes sense that maybe for a moment he'd entertain the idea of Lara Jean. But he doesn't just entertain the idea. He pushes it beyond the idea of entertaining to acting on it, even though she's saying, I have a boyfriend, I'm with this guy. Sure, they're putting it on as an act, but Josh doesn't know that, and he pushes his boundaries much farther than he ever should. That is why this relationship does not work out. By pushing the boundaries, we're showing that Josh really isn't sure of what he wants, or really whom he is. If he's sure of what he wants, he would know what to do in this situation. He would at least know that you definitely don't kiss a girl without permission. He then lies, or at least neglects to mention to her older sister that something like this happened once she returns from England. And in this case, Lara Jean's refusal of Josh is not quite as sure as Jo's refusal of Laurie in Little Women, and that is because Lara Jean isn't quite willing to admit that in fact she likes Peter, the boy who she's been pretending is her boyfriend and whom got one of these letters that she wrote. She's very sure of what she wants. She just doesn't want to admit it, and that's the comfort of familiarity. Familiarity is something which Jo is willing to throw aside. She goes to New York, she gives up all sorts of things, and she's willing to throw it aside and do something about it. Lara Jean, not so much. Now, does that make her less of a heroine than Jo March? No, not at all. She's just a completely different character who gets stuck in a kind of similar situation. And in fact, we find between Peter and Lara Jean, they are much deeper than they appear on the outset. And honestly, they're better suited to each other in the same way that Professor Bear and Jo March are often better suited to each other than Jo and Laurie. So it goes with Lara Jean and Peter as compared to Lara Jean and Josh. In both these cases, the idea of a romantic relationship between the female protagonist and the boy next door does not really work out. And it doesn't work out because they're not on similar levels. While there is the comfort of familiarity between the two, and there's the idea of maybe being similar in some respects, they are emotionally not similar enough for a relationship to work out. And hence, the third outside character, who is not our boy next door, is able to win the heart of our protagonist. And really, they don't win it, they earn it. They earn it through emotional similarities, intellectual similarities, and just overall being better suited with the protagonist. So yes, we all love the boy next door, but sometimes it's not going to be a good romantic relationship for our female protagonist. But that is all from me today, you guys, and so until next month's, hopefully, as it'll be June, and June's gonna be insane. Cheers.